Lizzie. Today's video is about 9 Catholic saints who specifically love and take care of and understand those of us who have mental illness. If you are against Catholics praying to saints, I have an entire video called Why Catholics Pray to Saints in Heaven that will be linked up here and below. The reason this is confusing is because the Old English meaning of the word pray actually means to ask. So when Catholics say pray to saints, we never mean a worship prayer. It is just asking a Christian in heaven to pray for us. If you are Protestant and you're fine ethically asking your family and friends to pray for you, there is not an empirical difference between that and Catholics asking our Christian family in heaven to pray for us. Again, watch my video on that, but now let's get into this video. Starting strong, number 1 is Saint Juan Diego, the saint to pray to for suicidal thinking. I'm going to say this all throughout the video. Right now, if you're uncomfortable hearing about suicide, here's the part of the video to skip over. Saint Juan Diego is the one who Mary appeared to in Mexico in the 16th century in the Our Lady of Guadalupe miracle. I made an entire video about it that is linked up here and below. Saint Juan Diego's testimony and the image on the tilma directly led to 9 million Aztecs choosing to convert into Catholicism. What a lot of people don't know about Juan Diego is that the miracle which got him canonized was saving the life of a teenager who committed suicide. In 1990, a 19-year-old named Juan Jose Barragan had severe depression and he attempted suicide by jumping off the balcony of his apartment building. His head hit the concrete pavement 30 feet below. It fractured his skull and he had a 0% chance of survival. Then his mom asked Juan Diego in heaven to pray for her son, and the miracle happened which saved Juan's life. So many mental illnesses have suicidal thinking as a major symptom. Major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, schizoaffective disorder, and schizophrenia. As a Catholic with bipolar disorder, I feel so much strength and comfort in Saint Juan Diego. If God's power can work through Juan's prayers to save the life of someone who has already attempted suicide, God's power working through those prayers can definitely protect our lives and give us the strength to stay alive amidst intense suicide ideation. Quick disclaimer, if anyone is new to my channel, I have made dozens of videos talking about mental illness and I absolutely believe in therapy and especially going on medication. So I absolutely believe that yes, we need modern medicine, but that should always go together with the strength from our Christian faith. Number 2, Saint Teresa of Lisieux. She is the saint to pray to for so many different mental illness symptoms. She lived in France in the 19th century and she is one of the doctors of the church. She is currently one of the most popular saints in the world, and my favorite story of her, she wanted to become a nun earlier than they allowed. So she literally went to Rome and asked the Pope if she could be a nun at 15. Teresa only lived 24 years and her life involved so much suffering. She experienced symptoms of OCD, anxiety, and depression throughout her life. She also went through a time of suicidal thinking and she even had hallucinations as a child during a nervous breakdown. She also described herself as being hypersensitive. Despite having her autobiography Story of a Soul, it's difficult to piece together exactly what she'd be diagnosed with if she lived today. When Teresa was young, she experienced a lot of trauma in her life. Her mom died of cancer when she was only 4 years old, and soon after, her older sisters left home to join convents to become nuns. Teresa's older sister Pauline was like a mother to her, and when Teresa was 10 years old, Pauline left to join the convent. That shattered her, but Teresa always had such a close relationship with her dad, which brought her so much comfort. Teresa experienced a lot of bullying in school, and when she was 12 years old, she began experiencing scrupulosity, which is a symptom in OCD. I have an entire video about scrupulosity linked here and below. Basically, it is an intense fixation on one sin. Thinking a lot of things are sins when they are not, and then not feeling forgiven even after repeatedly going to confession. Teresa became a nun at 15 and she joined some of her older sisters at their convent. She has so many beautiful things in her book of everything she learned and the ways she flourished spiritually as a nun. She had an extremely painful ending to her life. She developed tuberculosis at 23. Physically and mentally, it put her in such a negative headspace and she became extremely suicidal, even writing that if she was not Christian, she definitely would have killed herself. That's so helpful to us today that even in suffering, God should be the reason that we stay alive. Number 3, St. Catherine of Siena is the one to pray to for eating disorders. I will share exactly when I'm about to go in depth about her eating disorder if you want to skip past. Catherine lived in Italy in the 14th century and she is one of the most influential and iconic Catholics of all time. Like St. Teresa, Catherine is also a doctor of the church and she was a mystic having intense visions throughout her life. Catherine was very involved politically at her time, corresponding with the Pope and civil leaders. She had so much power and influence. She had disciples, men and women following her, and she ministered to the poor and the sick and the hungry. But amidst all of this, she had very severe eating disorder symptoms. To preface this, I've heard Catholics talk about her extreme fasting in a positive way, how spiritually epic it was that for the last part of her life she lived only on the Eucharist. But her priest at the time told her to stop, and the dangerous fasting went against the Dominican rules. Ultimately, she died at the young age of 33. Of all the mental illnesses, eating disorders have the highest death rate, and so we should always take them extremely seriously. At 16 years old, she became a lay member of the Dominican order, and that is when her restrictive eating began. From that point on, she only ate bread, raw vegetables, and water. Through the years, it continued to spiral out of control. Sometimes she would chew on food and spit it out without swallowing. She would sometimes take a stick, force it into her mouth to throw up the food she'd eaten. Unfortunately, there were other Catholic women at the time also doing extreme fasting like this, and again, the church did not approve of it. Modern doctors have called this type of religious fasting anorexia mirabilis. Different from anorexia nervosa in that the main motive did not involve losing weight, and it might not have involved body dysmorphia, but we don't know. Catherine or other Catholic women could have been wanting to change how their body looked. Towards the end of Catherine's life, she only ate the Eucharist, drank water, and had bitter herbs that she would either chew on, spit out, or eat and then vomit. Towards the end of her life, she reported being physically unable to digest food and not even able to drink water because of how much she damaged her body. Even though Catherine never overcame her eating disorder in her life, she's healed in heaven and she's an incredible person to pray through because she's experienced so many of those symptoms. Number 4, St. Joseph Labrie, also called Benedict Joseph Labrie. He lived in the 18th century in Boulogne, France. Like St. Catherine and St. Teresa, he died at a very young age at 35. Many people think of him as the saint of mental illness, and he is also the patron saint of homeless people. He was born Catholic, the oldest of 15 children. He absolutely loved school as a child and really enjoyed reading. He enjoyed prayer so much that many times he didn't want to play with the other children, and he actually preferred hanging out with adults as a child because he liked the intellectual conversations. At age 16, he asked his parents if he could become become a monk, but they refused because he was so young. They finally gave in and allowed him to become a monk in the Carthusian order, but he was rejected from 2 different monasteries. At 21, he was allowed to join at the Cistercian abbey, but he fell ill and was asked to leave. Then he traveled to Italy to find a monastery to join, but he was still unsuccessful. Looking at this from the perspective of him having a mental illness, it kind of makes sense why he was consistently being rejected by these religious orders. He probably had some odd behavior that they saw as kind of a red flag. Religious life today is way more accepting of mental illness because we know what it is, we can treat it, they can be on medication, but at this time, they did not understand mental illness the way we do today. At this point, he decided that he just wanted to live a penitential life alone in the world. He decided to become homeless. He left with just the clothes he had on. He wore a rosary around his neck, carried another rosary to pray with, a crucifix, a liturgy book of prayers, and then the book The Imitation of Christ. Joseph slept every day on the ground outside, and he ate food from the trash that people had thrown away. He never begged for money and only accepted food if someone offered it to him. And when he was given it, he would always share with other poor people. For the next 7 years, he traveled all around Europe, visiting different churches and taking pilgrimages to the popular holy sites. Then, the last 6 years of his life, he lived in Rome, sleeping in the ruins of the Colosseum. He died of exhaustion and probably also hunger and just not taking care of himself at 35 on the steps of a church. The reason he became so famous, number one, a lot of Catholics in Rome saw him and knew him, but after he died, there were over 100 miraculous cures attributed to him praying to God, asking for God to work. And his biographer, who was his priest, is the one who wrote in depth about all the miracles. A famous Catholic convert, Father John Thayer, is American, but he was visiting Rome, he saw these miracles happening, and that's why he converted into Catholicism. Number 5, Saint Dymphna. She's officially the patron saint of all mental illness. Saint Dymphna was a princess in Ireland in the 7th century. Her mom was Catholic, so she grew up Catholic, and her dad, the king, was pagan. There is a lot of mysteries surrounding her life, but the main narrative is that her mom died, and then her dad wanted to marry her, so she told her priest about it, and they escaped and went to hide out in Geel. Her father eventually tracked them down, and he killed Dymphna's priest, and then he killed Dymphna. They were both considered Catholic martyrs because they died in opposition to evil. After her death is when she became famous because of all the miracles attributed to her. A lot of healings of people with mental illness. So this is extremely controversial. So many times people say that my bipolar is demon possession and I need to pray away my bipolar. So the story of Geel is an amazing example of Catholicism and science going together. Going back to the Middle Ages when all of this was going on, there was not a dichotomy between prayer and medical treatment. Lourdes, France is the #1 Catholic pilgrimage in the world right now, and a lot of people go there for physical, mental healing, and a lot of people do not get healed. An example is Saint Teresa de Lisieux's mom. She went to Lourdes to get her cancer healed. She didn't get a miraculous cure and she died. So a lot of people would bring their relatives with mental illness to Geel and they would not get cured. So they just left them in the town. This next story is so outstanding and it makes me so proud to be Catholic. So going back to the 15th century, the citizens of Geel began hosting people who had mental illness. And this amazing community still exists today, where there are hundreds of people with mental illness living as boarders in people's homes. So they're just inviting a stranger to live with them in their house to help them and take care of them. And they just live as a community together. As medicine has advanced and modern psychiatry has been created, now they have a mental health hospital where psychiatrists give them medication, they have treatment plans and everything, but they still live in people's homes rather than being put in a mental health hospital. Very well known in the medical world, and in the 19th and 20th century, when it became popular to lock away people with mental illness and abuse them, they criticized Gill for incorporating people with mental illness into society. But now doctors and politicians, sociologists are in awe of the Gill Catholic model. And it's an amazing example to the rest of the world. So that is Saint Dymphna's legacy. Number 6, Saint Louis Martin, Saint Teresa de Lisieux's dad. He had a lot of mental illness symptoms, and like I said with Saint Teresa, if they were to live today and see a psychiatrist, definitely diagnosed with something. Saint Louis is really famous too. He was canonized with his wife Zélie at the same time, which is super sweet. Their story is that both of them wanted to go into religious life and they were rejected. And so when they got married, they prayed that their children would get to go into religious life, and then all of their daughters ended up becoming nuns. So it's an amazing story of how powerful marriage can be. So like I said when talking about Teresa, Zélie died at 45, then all the daughters become nuns, go live in convents, so Louis is left alone. He had a lot of bizarre symptoms. He was running away, he had anxiety, some depression, paranoia, and he was actually put in a mental institution. One of the things he experienced was public shaming when his symptoms became extremely well known in the town that he lived in. He was living alone in the mental hospital, which so many people with mental illness can relate to, because mental illness can really harm your social relationships, so a lot of people are alone or feel alone. I think he's an amazing person to understand other people who are shamed today for their mental illness. At the time, there was so much stigma towards mental illness, but there still is today. If you are shamed for your diagnosis, experience stigma, pray to St. Louis. Also, if you're ever admitted to a psychiatric unit at a mental health hospital, that's so scary. I'm grateful I've never been, but if you are, St. Louis is someone who's been in that situation and will understand exactly what you're going through, so definitely ask him to pray for you. Number 7, Saint Monica is the one to pray to for alcoholism. She lived in the 4th century in modern day Algeria and is the mother of Saint Augustine. A lot of you might not think of alcoholism as a mental illness, but it's in the DSM as alcohol use disorder. There is a genetic basis for people who get addicted to alcohol, so professionals think of it as an illness. There is also a huge connection and so much overlap between mental illness and people who become addicted to alcohol. 45% of people with bipolar disorder and 33% of people with schizophrenia also have alcohol use disorder. Saint Monica is the patron saint of so many things, including conversions of family members, people going through physical and emotional abuse, people who are cheated on by their spouses. She experienced emotional, physical abuse by her husband throughout her life. He also cheated on her a lot. She prayed for decades for her son Augustine and for her husband to convert into Catholicism. Her husband converted basically on his deathbed. But what a lot of people don't know is that Monica also had an addiction to alcohol when she was younger. In Augustine's book Confessions, he talks about how when Monica was a child, her parents would have her go into the wine cellar to get wine. One day she took a sip of it and she hated how it tasted, but it led in to her drinking cups and cups of wine. She develops an addiction, and Augustine writes that through God's grace, she was able to fully overcome it. Monica is one of the best saints ever to have pray for you because she prayed for so long for her son and husband to convert into Catholicism. Decades. She did not give up, and they ended up becoming Catholic, so she will not give up on you. She will pray for you so intensely. Number 8, St. Josephine Bakhita is the one to pray to for PTSD. This is going to be a lot of detail of her story of being abducted as a slave and human trafficking, torture, abuse, all these things. So if you want to skip this part of the video, here's the timestamp to go to. She was born in southern Sudan in 1869 into a wealthy family. When she was 7, she was abducted and sold into slavery. She had 3 brothers, 3 sisters, a twin sister who she lost when she was abducted. She forgot her birth name amidst the trauma and she was named Bakhita by the slaveholders, and then she was given the name Josephine when she was baptized into Catholicism. She endured so much torture and trauma. She was regularly beaten, branded, she was scared for her life. One of the worst stories is that someone carved 114 wounds, tattoos into her, and then for the next month put salt on them every day to torture her. This is very common in victims of human trafficking and slavery today, where they brand and tattoo onto the victim. Knowing the history and culture at the time, she was probably also sexually assaulted. She was resold so many times. Eventually she ends up in Italy. Augusto was her last slave master and she was the babysitter of his daughter, Mamina, who went to Venice's RCIA. So Josephine went with her to RCIA, and then Josephine became interested in Catholicism. Josephine was confirmed and baptized in 1890, and she continued attending RCIA even after she was confirmed, which is so cool because I do this. So many of you do this. After a few years, she knew she wanted to become a nun. Then her slaveholder wants to take her back to Africa. She refuses. She does a lawsuit against them. It becomes a court case because slavery was illegal in Italy at the time. She won her freedom and was able to become a nun with the Canossian sisters in 1896. It's called the Institute of St. Magdalene of Canossa. She taught at the school and was so loved by the community. At the end of her life, she wrote a story, a biography of her life, which is how we know all the horrific details of what she went through. She died in 1947 and was canonized in 2000 by Pope John Paul II, and now she's even more alive in heaven praying for us. She is officially the patron saint to victims of human trafficking and modern day slavery. Number 9, Saint Agatha of Sicily. She is the saint to pray to for PTSD if you are a survivor of sexual assault. I'm not going to go into detail at all of her sexual assaults, so if you are a survivor, I think you'll be fine listening through the end of the video, but if it does get too much, this is the timestamp of when it will be over. Saint Agatha is called one of the virgin martyrs of the Catholic faith, which is such an amazing title because there's a lot of toxic purity culture in a lot of Protestant churches today where women are taught if they are sexually assaulted, they are impure and they're no longer a virgin. So the Catholic Church has been teaching since its infancy in the very ancient church that if a woman is a virgin and she is raped, she is still a virgin. I am so sad if you've come from any faith background or ideology where you were taught that if you are sexually assaulted, you lose part of yourself or you become impure. That is completely against Catholic theology. And of course, I've shared this in so many videos and live streams that we actually do not use the word virgin very much in Catholicism because we really focus on the present moment, chastity, celibacy in the present. Because if you're coming from a background where you made sexual decisions that you now disagree with, if you made choices in the past to participate in sex outside of marriage and now you're coming back to the Catholic Church or you're a convert, you want to live out Catholic moral theology, that's amazing. Go to confession, change, start living in the present. Back to Saint Agatha. She lived in the 3rd century in Sicily, Italy. She was born into Catholicism into a wealthy family. Agatha decided when she was young that her choice in living out the Catholic faith was to remain a virgin for God and to not get married. So this horrible man who we're not going to name, he really wanted to marry her. And so he proposed and proposed and proposed, and she said, no, 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 I do not want to marry you. He was high up in politics, and so because Christianity was illegal at the time, he was able to arrest her because it was during one of the persecutions under Emperor Decius. So he arrests Agatha and he threatens to torture her if she won't marry him. But she says, I am not marrying you. I'm gonna briefly talk about the sexual assault, so skip to here if you don't want to hear it. As a punishment, he imprisoned Saint Agatha into a brothel where she was repeatedly sexually assaulted every day. After that month, she still refused to marry him, and so she was put in jail and tortured. I don't want to go into details of the torture, but she endured through it with joy and strength. She had a vision in jail of Saint Peter, our first pope, and there was a miraculous healing of one of the wounds from the torture. Then her breasts were cut off, and in a lot of Catholic art in depicting Saint Agatha, she's holding her breasts on a plate. We do not have reliable evidence on how she died, but she did die as a martyr for the faith. Saint Agatha is also patron saint over volcanoes, fire, and lightning. So many miracles have been attributed to her prayers. Those were 9 saints to pray to for mental illness. In doing research for this video, there are so many more saints who dealt with mental illness symptoms, but these were the most compelling people I found who endured their trauma, finding strength in God, and who are alive in heaven right now wanting to help us. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!